Welcome to the Creepin' It Real show, your one-stop shop for weird news, spooky, otherworldly, and paranormal shenanigans. We'll take a dive into what's going on in creepy pop culture. You can follow us on Twitter at creepin_it and like us on Facebook at The Creepin' It Real Show. Do you have a paranormal story you'd like to share with us? You can email us at creepinitrealshow@gmail.com.
Good morning, good evening, and good afternoon for whenever you're listening to this.
Good day to you.
Yes, good day to you, I say. This is Creepin' It Real. I am the host this week, Christy, and we are going to be diving into, well, a little bit later, we're going to be diving into the story of Elizabeth Bathory. With us this week is Yardley. How are you doing, Yardley?
Hey, I'm doing good. This was a pretty good topic to talk about today, Christy. I got educated on a few things.
Good, me too. She's been an interesting story that I've always been interested in hearing about, but didn't know there's actually more to the story as I started to research her. And I went into this as kind of we're going to talk about how fucked up she is. And then the more I researched it, I'm like, wait a minute, maybe, there's some pretty good evidence to show maybe she wasn't as crazy as, her history has been written. So I'm really excited to dive in. And speaking of diving in, Moni, how are you this morning?
I'm well, and I'm excited about this topic also. So I've been watching, and I'm about to start reading. I just got it on ebook from the library, but The Handmaid's Tale. And do either of you watch that?
I've been putting it off because I hear it's terrifying.
It is fucked up.
What was the title of that again, Moni?
The Handmaid's Tale.
Yeah, I watched. I don't think that I watched the season finale of season 1. So I think either the last episode or the penultimate and the last episode I didn't. But yeah, it's the show. It was all right.
It's done really well, and it's very, at least from my perspective, emotionally painful to watch. Every single episode, something happens that's worse. You're like, it can't get any worse, and they find these new creative ways. But the reason I mention it, though, too, is because without knowing, we did not pre-chat on this specific topic, so I'm interested to see what you guys learned and what you've taken from Elizabeth Bathory's story. But I feel like some of it fits into that whole woman getting a little too uppity, fight the patriarchy type of thing.
Yeah, and that's I purposely did not put my opinion in the notes because I want everybody's opinions to be a surprise to each other as well as the listeners. So that's why I decided to not fill that in and let me just do my own surprise. Probably going to be pretty dead on with some of y'all's, although I might surprise you a little bit. But anyway, well, before we talk about Elizabeth, I wanted to do a quick follow-up. I guess it was our 10,000K extravaganza episode. We read a lot of personal paranormal stories from people that had written in, and Yardley read one from, I believe it's Micro Throwaway 64. I just looked it up. About the guy who was staying in his parents' shed with his dog, and there was something, he went to go outside to pee, and the door slammed behind him, and he was trying to open it, but it wouldn't open, and he could hear his dog growl and whimper and was terrified. And Yardley had a good question of how old was the dog? Was it known to have like behavioral problems or bark or be, kind of act in situations, or had he owned the dog long enough to even know the dog's behavior? And so I responded to him, and he did, at really quick response, he did say that his dog was 5 years old when he began staying in the shed and never had any kind of reactions or jumpy or anything like that. He said he wasn't even afraid of like thunder or any kind of storms or anything. And then he also said that the shed is now used for boxes and stuff his parents, don't want in the house, and they have never had anything happen. So for him, I think he's saying it was just probably something that wasn't attached to the shed in his mind and is more like Maybe something was just there that night. I don't know. That's what it seems like. If you're inclined to believe that there was something there, doesn't seem like it was really a part of the shed. So anyway, that was our follow-up on that. And yeah.
Cool.
So
yeah. Glad we got some answers there.
Yeah. So the dog was not new or had been, that was abnormal behavior for him. So also, I was always a week behind on The Terror because I started behind and then played catch up. And, with my new job, I'm traveling and doing quite a bit. And so I don't, I come home and try to catch up on everything. So I saw the season finale of The Terror, and Yardley was, I don't know if they're going to do a second season or not, but had another podcast about The Terror. And I wanted to get your opinion on the wrap up of the season. Like, how did y'all feel about the ending and the whole synopsis of it?
Well, on our podcast, it's called Talking Terror. And if you go to, we're on iTunes, also, I believe Spreaker, as well. Oh, and as well as SoundCloud, but it's called Talking Terror. It's Kente, myself, and Jen. And Jen she's a voracious book reader. So she read the source material, at least 2 times, and they're pretty thick books and they're pretty long reads. But so basically for the people like her who read the book, she felt a certain kind of way about the ending, because the ending definitely kind of departed from that, or the fates of certain characters kind of departed from that in the TV show. Myself, I was a person, I never read the book fully, but through doing the podcast, I would do my research online, Wikipedia, and there's certain chapters I would go to depending on the podcast where I would, research what happened in the book versus the show. Okay, so the ending for me, I didn't mind the ending as much because I understood that the way that they ended it had to be an ending for people who watch TV and don't read the books. You know what I mean? Yeah. So I thought with what they did from that aspect, I thought it was okay. But of course, if you're a fan of the source material, you should already know that they're going to have to take their liberties to adapt it to the show. But at the same time, I think that it's kind of fair, some of the criticisms the book readers had.
I'll have to listen to the episode because I didn't know it was coming from a book until you actually mentioned it when we first started talking about The Terror, and I didn't read it, and I do that on purpose because I don't like comparing books to TV shows or movies because, like you said, it's really hard to create unless you're doing an epic like seasons upon seasons upon seasons about a book, because books are just so long. You can't put everything in the book into a TV show or a movie. So I thought the ending was good. It was weird because I didn't know, I wasn't watching the movie knowing that at the end it was going to be about, the balance of the earth. And of course, Eskimos, Native Americans are kind of that, when you hear, that's kind of this, like for me, a related type where they are a little bit in tune with the earth. They're very visceral. And so I shouldn't have been surprised, but I was, and I thought it was a kind of a good message. And I also had a lot of questions about why he stayed. And then I watched the after comments from the producers or writers of the show, and they kind of explained their reasoning of why he stayed, and how, the ending, people were thinking that was his son, when that he was dead. And it was like, I knew immediately he was fishing because you have to, seal fishing. And then there was a little boy curled up next to him, and that was like the ending shot. Yeah. And he basically said, it's not his son. He's just now so trusted with the village that he can take one of their kids out. They all like collectively watch the children together. And he was now so trusted of a member. He is now hunting for food for them and caring for their children. So I thought it was such a huge just from when you first meet him and his struggles, and then the ending just was very, wow. I mean, a completely different person. So I thought it was, I thought it was a great ending
And
to me.
there will be no follow-up. This is it.
That's it? Okay.
This is the whole thing.
Darn, I kind of sad. I mean, of course, there's not going to be any stories about them, but I thought maybe another instance of, I can't remember the monster's name, what they called the monster, but like something like that happening in another part. What is it?
The monster was Tunbach.
Tunbach, yeah.
Tunbach, yeah.
So I thought it'd be interesting to see another instance of him coming to kind of balance that environment again somewhere else, like somewhere else cold, clearly, because he was, but anyway, that was great. Did you watch it, Moni at all? You've been all quiet over there.
No, actually, you guys were my guinea pigs because, as you know, I'm very limited in time and I've got that stupid narcolepsy that I fall asleep. So I wanted to know if it was worth watching. By the time I got so far behind that I was like, you know what, I'll just wait and see. Yeah. So, you guys talked about it being different than you thought, but was it worth your time? Do you want those hours of your life back, or are you happy you watched?
I mean, not for me. I mean, they do like the directing. Basically, the situation that these individuals are in is that they're basically, they're stuck in some of the most horrible conditions, and then they essentially discover that there's something else that's kind of out there with them. Mm-hmm. So these men who are pretty much military guys, they're trying to figure out a way to, get to a point where they can, well, basically it's all about survival, but there's lots of little things in it. And it's definitely worth it, but it's one of those, you're going to appreciate the directing and you have to really pay attention to what they're saying, because it's kind of it's a thing about the human condition and what happens when, a lot of things are taken away from you. And then you've got people who are in leadership that are trying to keep everyone together under a structure. It's just crazy. So I would say watch it. And we just recently had on Paul Reddy, who played the doctor, Mr. Goodsir. We had him on the podcast.
Oh, I gotta listen to that.
And we're trying to get Lady Silence and all these. We're lining them up. So
that's awesome. Oh, I'm definitely checking out. Moni, I will be honest with you. The first few episodes were really hard for me to get through because I had just started my job. I was learning how to wake up at 5 a.m. in the morning and then also come home and balance my family life, and then also where's the time for TV? I was turning into a Moni, so it was very hard for me because you do have to, it's a lot of talking, a lot of character development at the beginning. So you're just, because of Yardley and his comments that we kind of had here and there throughout our show, I would ask, and he kept me going back because of just his little comments here and there of how he thought it was, what his opinions were. So if it hadn't been for Yardley, I probably would have dropped it. And then I would say episode 3 or 4 is when you really start to see, I mean, even when the monster came out, I was kind of like, I still am just not, it just wasn't there. And then I don't remember what episode it was, but it finally just clicked for me, and I just was like, it was the first movie I watched when I would come home. It was like, oh, I gotta watch this. I can't wait to see what happens.
It's not gonna. I mean, it's not gonna be for everybody. It's on AMC, and if your favorite TV show is The Walking Dead, you will not like this. You know what I mean? Yeah. So it's for people who. It's people who. If you're into character development and how people react under stressful conditions, then you'll like it, and it definitely, the action or the things that happen definitely pick up the last 3. I think it's only 10 episodes, so it's not, it's not, out of control. So I would say give it a try.
Yeah, and I think it was great because at the end, I liked the people I didn't like at the beginning. Like they set these people up for you, and you see them struggling, and everybody's human, even the captains and everything. But towards the end, it's just kind of strange. Well, Dr. Goodsir I liked through the whole thing, but but the rest of them, it reversed. And then at the end, like, when I can't think of his name, I am so bad with names, but the other captain that they ended up becoming really good friends.
Yeah, you're talking about Franklin.
Yeah. I first did not like him. And then at the end I did.
I'm not Franklin Fitzjames.
Yeah, the one who was in Outlander. I don't know if you.
Yeah, he was in Game of Thrones too.
Yes.
Who, it was Fitzjames. I don't know why I was like Franklin. I was thinking about this other guy, but it's Crozier was the main guy, and then Fitzjames.
Yes, those two I ended up just really having endearing, that when I did not like them at the beginning. So anyway, if you've Moni, I would recommend it too. It's just get through those first few episodes and you'll be hooked. So anyway, all right, well, we're going to move on to Elizabeth Bathory, female serial killer. Good Lord, I cannot talk. This is going to be fun since I'm heading this one up. On December 29th, 1610, a garrison of soldiers stormed the Hungarian castle of... Okay, by the way, we are going to completely butcher these Hungarian names, and I apologize in advance because, well, we're American and we pretty much butcher every culture out there, so that's just how it is, and at least I am aware of it. So anyway, Castle of Kachtis and arrested Elizabeth Bathory. They accused her of roughly 100 Saw movies worth of torture and took her into custody. As the story goes, they caught her in the act, finding a freshly buried corpse and a cowering servant, badly beaten but still alive. A litany of charges piled against her so vile that they have literally become legend, and she would later be used as one of the primary inspirations for Bram Stoker's Dracula. But before we go into the gore, let's quickly go over the beginning of Elizabeth Bathory's life. Per Wikipedia, Elizabeth Bathory was born on a family estate in, here we go, Nyírbátor, Hungary, in 1560 or 1561, and spent her childhood at Ised Castle, which no longer exists, poor irrigation and swamps. Yeah, so that castle, literally during its the highlight of its life, there was constant slaves and workers irrigating the land around it. And so when the monarchy of that castle fell, it went pretty much quickly after. I can't imagine. So basically like the New Orleans of Hungary. There were no levees to help her castle. So anyway, her father was George Bathory of the Assad branch of the family, while her mother was Anna Bathory. Yes, they were related, people. Those were the days. Through her mother, Elizabeth was the niece of the King of Poland and the Grand Duke of Lithuania, of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, and the Prince of Transylvania. Elizabeth was raised Protestant. Oh, good Lord. As a young woman, she learned Latin, German, and Greek. Born into a privileged family of nobility, Elizabeth was showered and endowed with wealth, education, and a stellar social position. Before her first marriage, Elizabeth allegedly gave birth to a child. The child, said to have been fathered by a peasant boy, was supposedly given away to a local woman that was trusted by the Bathory family. The woman was paid for her act, and the child was taken to Wallachia. Oh, that sounds really butchered. As a child, she witnessed the brutal punishments handed out by her family's officers on their estates. One anecdote describes a gypsy accused of theft who was sewn up in the belly of a dying horse and left to die. Her family tree certainly included some disturbed kin as well. One of her uncles taught her Satanism, and she learned about sadomasochism. Thank you, God, from her aunt. So in other words, she was also very much known through the elite circles of the country and beyond to be incredibly intelligent and thoroughly educated. Her family, two huge powerhouses in Hungary, joined forces and became very powerful. So she was pretty set for life the second she was born. And I think I'll probably go on to say this again, but you can describe Elizabeth basically as I mean, I think my notes relate her to like the Kennedys of Lithuania, but honestly, it would be more than that. We're talking like if Bill Gates, the Kennedys, and the Vanderbilts all came together in one powerhouse. I mean, these people were the creme de la creme of this area and were extremely powerful. Pretty much did whatever they want. So she was raised very unusually, even for women of her time, and given a very, very highly regarded education, and was raised from the beginning to be pretty independent. Moni?
You have someone here, just before we get into that, because you have that as the discussion.
Yeah.
Even if it's not a woman thing, you have someone, as you mentioned, extremely educated, more wealthy than the monarchs, yet not a king or queen. And, you know, right off the bat, and someone who has been raised in such a way that thinks that they can do and get away with anything they want. So already you have someone who is a threat to other powerful people in the area. So I think we should keep that in mind.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Elizabeth was engaged at age 10, or actually some reports say 12, but still very freaking young, to Ferenc Nadasti in what was probably a political arrangement within the circles of the aristocracy. As Elizabeth's social standing was higher than that of her husband, she refused to change her last name. Yeesh, that's also not something that was done back then. Mm-hmm. Remaining a Bathory. The couple married when she was 15 and he was age 19, but it was okay for him, I'm sure. Mm-hmm. At the palace of, oh boy, Vernav non Toplu, okie dokie, on the May 8th, 1575. Approximately 4,500 guests were invited to the wedding. Elizabeth moved to Ferenc's castle in Sarvar and spent much time on her own while her husband studied in Vienna. Ferenc's wedding gift to Bathory was his household, some kind of, and it gets to the Hungarian, which is easier, some kind of castle situated in for God's sakes, Carpathians, now Slovakia. Now my tongue just doesn't work.
I know.
The castle had been bought by his mother in 1569. That's really interesting that the women were allowed to buy castles. Mm-hmm. In 1569 and given to Nadasadi, who transferred it to Elizabeth during their nuptials together in their country house and with 17 adjacent villages. Well, that's a nice cozy gift. You get a castle and 17 villages. The count was a soldier.
Extremely rare, again, at the time, giving a woman a castle with 17 villages that basically support the castle. So that's hers, not his.
Well, in her case, 17 villages full of young women to possibly or not. So, 17 villages worth of victims and victims. So her husband, the Count, was a soldier who would go lead armies of Hungary against Ottoman forces threatening Central Europe. He was really fierce. Yeah. After her marriage, the Countess became the mistress of, not as much fun, of the estate. Well, we just said that. Where the couple earned a reputation as harsh masters. Building upon her own cruelty, is believed that French showed her some of his ways of punishing the servants, and after 10 years, she had given birth to 3 daughters and a son. 3 new victims and a son.
More. So again, I think we already said this, but once Elizabeth and Ferenc were married, they officially became the richest people in Hungary, including the king. During their marriage, which we'll get into some more, they loaned the king tens of thousands of dollars, which is a lot of money back then. And again, very odd that while he was at war, which is pretty much his entire lifetime, she was trusted to take over all their kingdoms and take care of them. So, got anything to say about that, Yardley, or are you just you're a poor guy?
No, I mean, I'm just the fact that she has all of this wealth, and just like you're saying, she wasn't a married person. a lot of this stuff, over time, it seems like would be a recipe for someone at some point in time to kind of use that independence against her to their advantage. So I think that even though she was educated and she had all the money in the world, the fact that she was so independent, of course, sometimes that could be threatening, but also at the same time, your reputation, including people wanting to one up you, can kind of come back to bite you. So I guess as the story goes on, we'll learn a little bit more about that.
Okay.
Well, she started to also take over. She was given more castles in more areas, so they would travel around basically, and it's just there was a lot of power, as we said, but just to kind of give an idea of the scope. Because, and spoiler alert, we're going to say this in a minute, but she was accused of killing up to 600 people. And my husband's just like, how can someone, there's just not as many people back then as there are today. But if you're going to try and say you believe that for a minute, just think about the scope, the amount of distance they're covering, and how, you travel from one of your castles to another of your castles farther away, do your business and not make it back for a few more years, and you're just have nothing but victims along your path of destruction. So
sure. And I mean, people at the time had the belief systems of if somebody died, it was because you ate two beans instead of 10, or they were all very superstitious, and the disease was rampant. I mean, the life expectancy was very small, so people dying just wasn't, or disappearing just at the time. No, I can't say 650 worth, but yeah, I mean, it was a different time back then. People died all the time. Death was rampant, and so it wasn't as blaringly obvious if servants disappeared. They just...
Peasants.
You would, as a servant, if you went to work for the castle, you were kind of gone. I mean, your family, you don't go back and visit your family. It is a life sentence to work at the castle. And it was also that was a good thing. It was an honor. So if you went to work for the castle, you weren't going to visit your family on the weekends. You didn't get days off. You didn't get, leave time and insurance. So you go and you leave and you're a, kitchen assistant. Your family may never see you again. So there wasn't like the tracking that we would have now. So anyway, moving on, Yardley, what's this lady up to?
All right, well, let's dive a little bit more into Elizabeth. So although the Count participated in his wife's torture activities, it wasn't until the death of her husband in the early 1600s that Elizabeth's true evil allegedly came to fruition. She eventually moved to one of her castles at Koktis in northwest Hungary, which is also now Slovakia, and began surrounding herself with a cohort of servants to help her with her torture practices. Legend has it that one day an attendant girl was brushing Elizabeth's hair when she accidentally pulled too hard and it tugged on a snag. The Countess erupted in anger. She jumped up, struck the girl in the back of the head. She struck her so hard that it made her bleed, and the blood was left on Elizabeth's hand. Later that night, Elizabeth noticed that the skin on her hand, or at least what she thought where the blood had been, looked more useful. And then she had seen it, in many years. So basically, I guess, the aging process was taking a hold of her a little bit. For some reason, maybe it was a little bit of crazy. Maybe it was a little bit of blood. She thinks that spot looks a little bit more youthful. I don't know. Do y'all really think there's a point where your mind plays tricks on you concerning your looks?
Oh, well, I don't like aging. I'm not sure I would slather myself in peasant blood, servant blood, in order to stop that process. But
there is a vampire face mask that the Kardashians have been pushing for a while there, where they put, I don't know whose blood it is, but they put blood on their face.
Unfortunately, I guess that's just a part of life, though. Because, some days we wake up and we think that we look a little bit better than other days. So I suppose that there's nothing really odd about that. I think we all have these type of, we all have these types of things that go on in our minds about how we look or how we look to other people. So
If you are an incredibly rich and powerful woman, what is the one thing you don't have when faced with all these little peasant girls? You don't have their youth, their beauty, their, or at least you don't perceive yourself to have those things. So I could see, if you reach all of your goals in life and have nothing else to try to attain, then what? What does it lead to? I'm not saying you should start, killing people, torturing people, bathing in their blood, but what's next? If you have nothing better to do and you're sitting around going, I'm looking old. This blood made me look good. Okay, well, I can do whatever the hell I want. Power being something that makes you feel entitled to do whatever you want. And next thing you know, the rest of this.
Well, I think we all know where this is going. So she kind of makes the assumption that a little bit of blood made her skin look that much, more revitalized. So, hey, of course, if there's more blood, maybe, I can take it up a notch, and maybe this thing will kind of, make me look a lot younger. So essentially, it said that this is when the madness began for Elizabeth, and she literally started bathing in the blood of virgin girls. So in 1609, during a night raid, officials searched the castle and discovered the dead bodies of young girls everywhere that they looked. So this is pretty rough, though. I mean, I kind of I'm under the belief as well that there weren't as many people around these days. So I would think that the buzz over this happening, in the surrounding areas would have probably been huge, and quite possibly that could be the case. But for me, at what point, how many virgins do you have to kill and bathe in their blood to kind of realize that nothing's really happening?
Well, I can say I did watch a couple of different videos about Elizabeth, and there was a lot of buzz. There was a lot of people talking about the disappearances. There were people beginning to notice that she's apparently going through castle workers and assistants and handmaids and everything like underwear. And people were starting to make complaints, but because of her standing and literally in Europe, she was given lots and lots of leeway. Nobody actually went to her and said anything. It was just always a speculation, and there were always rumors that you don't want to work for this lady. That went on for years. So there was talk. It just never became an escalation to the point where, 650 people are missing. It wasn't like there were missing posters all over the castle walls, and it was just, boy, she sure does go through a lot of servants, type of talk. So, and the rumors, and I think there was even, and I think we'll get into the testimonials from the witnesses now, but even I think it was monks heard screams and was like, shut up, but they were never going to confront her. That was not to be done with the Bathorys, and especially her. So it's a very odd time, and this woman held a lot of power. We're going to discuss the testimonials, supposedly her and her closest servants and confidants did. These are just the accusations. There's actually even more that witnesses are saying, but it wasn't official testimonials that were given as reasoning to arrest her. So I'll start with the first one. Kept her servants chained up every night so tight their hands turned blue and they spurted blood. Moni, what's the next one?
Beat them to the point where there was so much blood on the walls and bed that they had to use ashes and cinders to soak it up.
Beat a servant in Vienna so loudly that her neighbors, some of them monks, threw clay pots at the walls in protest.
Strangled a servant to death with a silk scarf. Actually, it's a harem technique known as the Turkish way, a euphemism. Yes, I am totally using that in my daily life, by the way. Mm-hmm. So she strangled a servant to death with a silk scarf. It's fancy.
burned her servants with metal sticks, red hot keys. Jesus, I was like, where'd they get hot rods back then? And coins, ironed the soles of their feet and stuck burning iron rods into their vaginas.
Oh, damn! God dang it. We had to go there.
Yeah, I know. That's why I'm running past that one. Stab them, prick them in their mouths and fingernails with needles, and cut their hands, lips, and noses with scissors. Force the servant's mouth to open until it split open on the sides.
There is actually a drawing of that, by the way, by a servant. They drew a picture of what they witnessed them do to the servant, where it's showing hands opening this person's mouth and it's ripping open on the sides of the jaws. It's unbelievable. Used needles, knives, candles, and her own freaking teeth to lacerate servants' genitals.
Stitch their lips and tongues together.
Made servants sit on stinging needles, then bathed with the said stinging needles. During the bath, she'd push the needles. Oh, the nettles. Oh, okay, that's right. Stinging nettles. During the bath, she'd push the nettles into their shoulders and breasts.
Oh.
Had them stand in tubs of ice water up to their necks outside until they died.
I heard about that. Smeared a naked girl with honey and left her outside to be bitten by ants, wasps, bees, and flies. I heard they all watched when they did that.
That's not creative.
That is not a way to go.
I heard that they tied her to a tree and everybody watched while that happened.
Yeah.
All right. She kept them from eating for a week at a time, and if they got thirsty, she made them drink their own urine. However, according to Bear Grylls, you can survive off of that. So
yeah, they're fine. I mean,
good old Bear. Force them to cook and eat their own flesh, usually from the buttocks, or make sausages and serve it to guests.
This is some American Horror Story TV
shit. They need to make
Heated up cake to red hot temperatures and made the servants eat it.
Okay, all right. Baked a magical poisonous cake in order to kill a rival magistrate, George Thurzo, who was also the guy who arrested her, and we'll talk about him a little bit more.
Cast a magic spell to summon a cloud filled with 90 cats to torment her enemies. Okay, that is actually kind of awesome. Yeah. Or she was the epic cat lady.
Had an ongoing affair with some guy named Ironhead Steve. That's so metal, man. That's like... I beat the blood and fuck Ironhead Steve.
She stuffed 5 servants' corpses underneath the bed and continued to feed them as if they were still alive.
Okay. Buried them in gardens, grain pits, orchards, and occasionally cemeteries, sometimes with rites, often without. All right. So that's some fucked up shit.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. It's pretty. Yeah.
I have much commentary, but
some of those were just like you could tell the way some of the tortures kind of fell off. Like she was a little bit more bored at some times than other. All of this sucks. I'm like, why? In my head, I'm like, I want this to be a movie, and at one point somebody kind of slinks out of the chair and then starts torturing her, kind of like a reverse Theon with Ramsay deal going on. This stuff is pretty horrible. I mean, I guess still, but in this day and age, wouldn't a lot of this be alleged?
Yeah.
It is, it was alleged. I mean, as we'll get into in a minute, is like, it took 6 years to get the attention of investigators. And once it got the attention of investigators, she was tried. Like, they gathered 300 witnesses in a couple months' time and then tried her within like 2 days and sentenced her. It was just like something was freaking fishy there. But I'm laughing that you said some of this sucks, because I'm just like, yeah, most forms of torture tend to suck. And things we wouldn't want to have happen.
Well, it's the ones with the what was it, the honey and the bees. Mm-hmm. I don't even think that that's something that's necessarily something that would kill you. It would just be horrendous pain. You know what I mean? Depending on where it's at. So yeah, this,
Well, it killed Candyman in the Candyman movie. I'm just saying. So Didn't it? I know they did that to him, but I can't remember if that's how he died.
It's
Anyway,
been so long since
the
I've seen
first
that
time.
movie.
Oh, that movie's so good. They need to make a good remake of that. But anyways, so finally, after hearing countless testimonials of the appalling activities that went on behind the castle walls, Elizabeth and her servants were convicted on 80 counts of murder, although evidence showed as many as 650 females may have been killed in total. I call bullshit. Her servants were sentenced to death, but Elizabeth was imprisoned for life in a room in her own castle that was boarded up with tiny slits for air and food. Elizabeth lived for 3.5 years before she was found dead, lying face down on the floor. After her death, Countess Elizabeth Bathory went down in history as one of the most evil women who have ever walked the planet. Or was she? No?
I mean,
Oh, shit. I was on mute. Sorry.
Well, no, I was saying, like, if a lot of this stuff, is true, absolutely, it would be one of the most evil women person to have ever walked the planet, because it looks like a lot of these alleged crimes are things that she really directly had a hand in, like each death. So I think that not only makes it horrific, but that would definitely get her, a trophy, concerning being a serial killer. So at least for me, yeah.
Well, Bathory's case may not have been that cut and dry. In fact, some Hungarian scholars say it may have been motivated more by others' power and greed than her supposed evil. As we discussed earlier, King Matthias II owed Bathory's late husband, and then her, after he died, the debt moves to her, a sizable debt. And Matthias was not inclined to pay the debt, which historians say may have fueled his move to incriminate the Countess and deny her the opportunity to defend herself in court, which I find interesting because I also read, and will say later, that King Matthias wanted her to testify in court, but Thurzo, who we'll get into in a minute, didn't let her testify. So those are kind of it's not really counteracting itself. So I'm not sure about that. But anyway, also Elizabeth was a take no shit kind of girl who took charge, and the menfolk surprisingly didn't take kindly to a woman boss owning and controlling that much money and property. As said before, she didn't even take her husband's last name. Perhaps historians say the true story of Elizabeth Bathory looks more like this. The Countess owned strategically important land that increased her family's already vast wealth. As an intelligent, powerful woman who ruled without a man at her side, and as a member of a family whose wealth intimidated the king, along with her family's century-long reign, like the Kennedys of Hungary, but I take it more like the Kennedys, Vanderbilts, and the Gates of Hungary, and his court went on a mission to discredit and ruin her. Possibly, and we'll discuss that in a little bit.
Yeah, okay. Well, let's talk a little bit more about George Thurzo, who was mentioned a little bit earlier. He was the Palatine of Hungary, and ironically, her husband, Ferenc's old best friend, who was with him when he died, knew Elizabeth's cousin, Gabor, was gunning for the throne, literally was starting a war over it. And Elizabeth was widowed with more money than God. So Thurzo was like, hell no, I'm not going to let these two partner up, and decided to take Elizabeth down. The only way to get rid of such an entrenched power as Elizabeth was to catch her committing a horrific act red-handed, which Thurzo said that he did, although it took him 24 hours to produce that evidence. Well, afterwards, they never had a trial, despite the king demanding one for 3 years straight. Elizabeth never got to speak in her defense, and her family records were mostly destroyed. There is very little to go on in determining what sort of person that she actually was.
So here's the question. I have my own theory, so I'm going to listen to y'all's, and then we can get into the debate. Was she the ultimate bloodthirsty vampire, bathing in 650 tortured young girls' blood to retain her youth, and generally just an all-around fucked up bitch? Or was she set up to lose power and cancel out a long-standing debt of the king? Moni?
So there is something we didn't mention. There was a crew. I mean, obviously she was the countess. She had staff or, people working for her, but there was a dwarf. I don't have his name right here,
Yeah.
but there was a dwarf and there was like a right-hand servant who was like a real badass witch woman.
Yeah.
I'm saying at best, and this is not good, at best, Elizabeth was a shitty boss. She was someone who abused her servants, who let others, abuse her servants as maybe, you're my right hand, you do these things for me, do what you want with this young girl. I mean, you're looking at young women, especially young women without any kind of money and without strong parenting, which once you're sent to a castle to work, as we discussed, you become basically without a family, are the most at-risk group on the planet still to this day. And so you have a bunch of pretty young things and you have a bunch of, right-hand special servants who you want to reward. Let them do whatever they want. I mean, you've seen Game of Thrones. Do whatever you want with the girl. That's your present. So I'm just saying that Elizabeth wasn't the only one, even if she was the overseer or, of course, knew about these things, that was allowing very bad things to happen to innocent young girls in her home. So that's part of it, is that, at the end of the day, when the rap fell on her, it was all her, but it wasn't. I mean, I guess I shouldn't say that because her servants were put to death, but as
She
far
was
as the
allowed to
blame,
live. Yeah.
you don't know how much her servants, I mean, to this day, groups of people who work for really powerful, like politicians or actors or movie producers, go out and find you the victims for all of you to party with, kind of thing. She
Right.
wasn't looking for these people herself. So I think that some of the legend that surrounds her definitely came from small town gossip and, turned into folklore that we hear today. But also I think a lot of it had to do with, again, she was becoming too powerful and too uppity. It was okay for her to be doing the shit she was doing in the eyes of people that weren't threatened at the time. Until she threatened them, she was allowed to do whatever she wanted. And once that changed, all of a sudden it was 650 girls and bathing in their blood. Come fucking on,
Yeah, exactly. I agree with everything that you said, Moni. And then
Yeah.
also like this little, the whole thing about, the evidence and George Thurzo getting produced so quickly and her not getting a chance to defend herself. And, like a lot of those things definitely lead me to believe that, the little things that she did ended up being huge down the stretch. And also, whenever you're in a position where you can loan money to the crown, it's bad news if you don't, because that's the crown. It's bad news if you do, because now, even though they owe you, it's still the crown. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so you're getting tied up financially with certain things. And I just, I don't believe these massive numbers at all, but I do think that there is some truth that she got a little bit out of control with her lot in life. But I also believe that her wealth and independence is one of the things that brought her down.
Yeah. And, she could not have been put to death. I mean, this is something that the crown was smart enough not to kill her, because let's be honest, her family would have retaliated regardless of what she was found guilty of, which the crimes that we read are the ones she was actually found guilty on. It didn't matter, because if they had killed her, there would have been major shit. Like, the family is very powerful and they would have retaliated. So they did best they could do and they locked her up in the castle. She only lived for another 3.5 years. I am of probably in your court, in that where there's smoke, there's fire, for sure. I mean, you don't get accused of something so vile and be 100% innocent. I think that she was a shitty person, and I think that she was a shitty boss and was abusive. And I think these servants, given the opportunity to get the fuck out of this situation, did give the crown, evidence, quote unquote, to bring her down so that they, weren't going to be abused any longer. So yeah, I think she was guilty of being a bad person, abusive. She probably did some of her servants probably did die because of her, but I don't think she was bathing in their blood and all that. But also, and here's something that I was thinking about while I was reading up on her, because we do talk about her vanity and how she had all this money, like you said, Moni, but yet was still going to age, and these, still going to have prettier, younger women around her. And back then there was, makeup, and the older you get, the more you piled on your face, but it was also literally like 70% lead and incredibly poisonous. And just like we saw in The Terror, lead can make you fucking crazy. And so I think she's a bad, entitled, shitty person. But I also think that as she got older, it escalated. And it's possible because she was piling on this fucking makeup and it was making her crazy and horrible and mad and abusive and everything else, because she had the power to do that and abused her power. And also probably got really sick. She only lived another 3.5 years. Of course, she was bricked up in her room, but I mean, by law, they did have to feed her. They did have to, take care of her needs and keep her alive, just so that her family would not go crazy and retaliate. So I think, and that's something I haven't really read much about regarding her, but with her vanity and with her power, it seems like possibly something was really fucked up with her, and piled on to her entitlement. So I agree with you guys that she was a shitty person. Now, I don't see her as a 650 mass murderer. I think, like most people of her time and her standing, she is probably responsible for some deaths. And I think a lot of leaders of castles, Countess, Baroness, are back then, because those people were expendable. Yeah. So that's why they had to create this kind of story, because a couple of servants dying under your watch is nothing back then. Nothing. And like we had talked about, easily covered up. So they had to create something so fantastical to bring her down. And also, George Thurzo, like we had discussed, was her husband's best friend, and on his dying bed, he made Thurzo promise to always look after Elizabeth and his children. And he promised that, and then yet still to keep her from marrying her cousin and becoming straight up, like, ruling everything, like, more than she even was before, because he was trying to become king, he brought her down. Yep. And she just, on top of that, was probably a shitty ass person. So she kind of created her own demise, and then they just built upon it, because these servants were probably like, get me the fuck out of here. She's an asshole, horrible boss, we want out. And made up anything they could think of with the magic spells, with the raining cats and all that shit, and which they'd believe, back then, to get out of there. So she was kind of the creator of her own demise, because she was a shitty person, and anybody was willing to believe anything, and it wouldn't have been a surprise. So yeah, I guess we all kind of agree on that.
Totally.
Yeah. So anyway, cool. Well, I guess and the thing is we talk about history and learning history and how it's written back then, and it just is dependent on who was in control as to how the history went. And so we'll never know really what happened unless they can find some sort of journal or something that will show anything different. She died, and when she died, they got rid of her entire past. They weren't even allowed to talk about her for decades.
Yeah, and I think it bears saying too that as far as the stuff being so horrific, if you, back in those days, the tolerance for things was different, and life was more brutal and that kind of thing. You'd be like, oh, a young girl died because the castle is drafty and she got mold or whatever, breathed it in and died under her watch. And they'd be like, meh, so, okay, well, she was bathing in their blood every night, and all of a sudden it's like, oh, we got to do something about
what?
this person.
Yeah,
You
I
know?
mean, let's be honest. I mean, you had servants building, the castle, falling to their death, falling in boiling pots of water, trying to cook. I mean, servants died all the time. And especially if you put them in, extreme circumstances and not give a shit, which I'm sure she did. And if they did pull her hair, I could see her beating the shit out of one. That I could see. So
I beat the shit out of someone for pulling my hair too.
Hell yeah! How dare you try to brush my hair and make it look nice? Now I'm gonna beat the shit out of you. So I mean, yeah, she is an asshole, clear and simple. I mean that's clear. So she also, and so was her husband. Like you talked about, Moni. He, in fact, there are paintings of him celebrating his, victories by sawing his enemies in half, hanging them up from their legs, and literally starting from their crotch and sawing them in half.
Saw those.
Kicking heads around like soccer balls. I mean, it was a brutal time back then, and this man was the baller of
he
war.
was a man, okay, and also it was war, so that's different.
Not really, but
I'm
sure.
being sarcastic.
And then you've got his wife, who is very much independent, and just as much, she's more powerful than him in name. I mean, he ended up making a really big name for himself by conquering all these wars. So they were kind of, at the end, pretty even as far as power. And so she probably did learn quite a bit from him and, his practices. So, and then also, I think she was just a bitch all on her own. So anyway, yeah, I mean, interesting stuff. And I've been reading reports that, she was just 100% set up. And I'm like, no way. Where there's smoke, there's fire. This bitch was an asshole. But I don't think she was the vampire bathing in 650 women asshole. That's just what it took to bring her down. So anyway, it was an interesting subject to read up on. And I'm actually want to order some more books and read up on it more because it has piqued my interest even more. So, and I'm shocked there is a movie out there, and it is from the UK, and I tried watching it, and it is don't even waste your time. So, I'm waiting on a better version.
Yeah, but I guess she doesn't warrant one because she was a woman. What?
Say what?
So next week, I don't know if y'all have heard, probably maybe not because you guys aren't Walking Dead fans, and I definitely am of the mind that the series needs to have an end date and end soon. And to that, I will say that Andrew Lincoln has announced that he will be exiting the show after this upcoming season 9 is complete. So I think that's really interesting. As also, spoilers, Chandler Riggs is gone from the show. A lot of your originals are leaving, and I hope that makes the showrunners make an end date. But I did want to, for next week, as far as that is related, I'm still, I know zombies are kind of over or whatever in cinema and TV shows, but I am still fascinated by the science, how science says that, zombification is possible. The human body is capable of reanimation through a specific series of events. So we're going to be watching a movie. It's a Netflix original. It has mixed reviews, but it's no Jeepers Creepers 3, so that's good. It's called Cargo, and it's Martin Short, I want to say. He is a father who... Oh, sorry, Martin Freeman.
I'm like, what?
Wait a minute. I knew that wasn't right. Anyway.
That would have been awesome.
He has a little girl, and he becomes infected in a zombie outbreak and knows that he has, I think, 72 hours to find safety for his little girl. But where do you find safety in a land full of zombie outbreak? So we're going to watch the movie, but not just do a review. We're going to talk about, what we would do, for instance, if either any of us, don't tell me now, have ever thought about the zombie apocalypse and what you will do if such an outbreak of virus occurred. I would also love to hear from Creepers. If you guys want to share with us via social media or our email address, any thoughts you've ever had about, do you have an escape plan for the, I feel like, inevitable outbreak of a virus or a plague on the planet? And if so, what is your plan? What is your game plan for such a thing occurring? So I'd love to hear from the creepers.
Excellent. Yep, please write it in, or tweet us and let us know what your state of emergency zombie plan is. Great. All right, Yardley, you have anything else to add, or you want to give us your social media stuff?
Well, my social media handle for Twitter is @militant_marker. And it'll be interesting to talk about that Cargo movie. I made it about 30 minutes in. I'll go ahead and knock it out, but I've got I'm not, I'll talk about it, but it'll be fun to watch the rest, because I don't want to base, everything on the first half hour, but there were some things that I saw in that first half hour that I wasn't a fan of, including the editing. But anyway, I look forward to that. If you want to reach out on social media, holla at your boy.
Great. Moni, what's your handles?
I am Rebel Moni, MONY, on Twitter, and I am MONI BARRE on Instagram, Moni Bear.
Great. Also, we have received a few submissions on the paranormal stories, and we'll probably do another episode probably in the next couple of, next couple of shows, depending on what we can get. So if you would like us to read your paranormal story on air and discuss,
or your zombie stories.
Or your zombie story, yes, please. Also, zombies and your zombie escape plans. Go for it. We'd love to hear from you, and we'll listen for it on the show. So with
email
that,
address?
Yes, it's thecreepinitrealshow@gmail.com. And our Twitter handle is @creepin_it. Just stop by and say hi, even if you don't have a story. And everything else, I've hardly been on Instagram and Facebook. Sorry, I'm just trying to manage one at this moment because shit's crazy. But we're the Creepin' It Real Show across the board, anywhere you search for us. So again, thank you guys for tuning in, and we will catch you on the flip side.
Kill me, my friend, and it's my heart. It's so simple, yeah, easy to understand. Where to strike and where to climb, where to cut, where to shoot. Only need to start everything you do. It's so simple, I know you do. It's so easy and it's so hard. I know this because it's true. Kill me, my friends, it's your duty. Kill me, my friends, it's your chance. Kill me.